Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. In this lecture we're going to set up full controller support for our game, including regular actions and menu navigation. Okay, so first let's just set up the controller inputs. I have an Xbox gamepad controller connected. So let's open up our player input actions. And over here we have all of our actions, and we already made the move one a long time ago. So let's just add the bindings for the other ones. For example, over here on the interact, let's add a brand new binding. Let's go into the path and listen. And for interact, I'm going to press the A button. And again, here you can specify just the A button on an Xbox controller, or you can use the generic South button, which will mean A on an Xbox, or cross on a PlayStation, or B on a Switch, or anything else. So let's go with the generic one. For the internet alternate, let's add a binding, and for this one I'm going to put it on the X on the Xbox, so the button west. And for the pause, let's listen, and I'm going to press the menu, which is the start button. Okay, so these are the basic inputs. Let's make sure they work, and thanks to this new input system, we really don't need to modify any code. Let's just save this asset. Let's wait for the compilation, and then we can do a test. So here we are, and yep, I'm using my controller to move. Now let's just wait for the countdown, and go up there and pick up a cheese, put it, and slice some cheese. Yep, I can do that, pick up a plate, and so on. All right, so everything works. Let's also pause, and yep, that also works. Okay, great. So everything works, except there are two issues with the gamepad, especially one with the movement that I only noticed just now. The first issue that we have is the dead zone. Right now we don't have one, so if I just lightly touch my gamepad joystick, there you go, it starts moving automatically. In gamepad games, you should always have some kind of dead zone to prevent any kind of Joy-Con drift. Thankfully, that is super easy to solve. Let's just go into the player input actions, let's go into the move, find the left stick binding. And over here for the processors, let's add one, and let's add a stick dead zone. So that's it, pretty simple. This basically considers that inputs under this minimum to be 0, and above this maximum to be 1. So if you have joystick drift, where when the joystick is idle, it's always moving by, say, 0.1 in any direction, this helps solve that problem. Except in our case for our game, we're only using normalized inputs. So actually, for our use case, let's increase the minimum by quite a bit. I did some testing and 0.5 works quite great, and the max at default, that is just fine. Okay, so that's it, one problem solved. Let's just go ahead, save this asset. Now the other bigger issue that we have is if I approach a counter and I try to look at it, it's really difficult. It tries moving left and right instead of actually facing the counter. That's because of the logic that we added a long time ago, that logic to help the character controller feel better when moving on diagonals against a counter. That works great for keyboard because it's digital, so it's either moving fully left, fully right, or on the diagonals. But it messes up the controller, which is analog. On the player movement, if we are not moving perfectly up or perfectly down, then it's considered a diagonal. And on the gamepad, it's really difficult to get a perfect just up or just down input. We're always going to have a tiny bit of either left or right. So that's the issue that we have here. And thankfully, the solution is actually pretty simple. Let's go over here onto our player script, and let's scroll down into the handle movement function, okay? So we're doing a can move using the regular move direction, and if it doesn't work, then it's over here that we are attempting only the X movement or only the Z movement. And for doing that, we made it so we can move if there's nothing only on the X, and if we have any movement at all on the X. So if it is different from 0. Basically, the issue here is if the moveDeer.x is, let's say, 0.001, that is still different from 0, so it is still going to trigger this logic. So basically, let's just widen this gap. Instead of testing literally just different from 0, let's test if the moveDeer.x, if it is under, say, minus 0.5f, or if moveDeer.x, if it is bigger than plus 0.5f. So instead of being exactly just on 0, we're only going to consider diagonals if we are at least moving 0.5 either left or right. So we just do this, and same thing over here, except we just test for the z, so the moveDeer.z and the moveDeer.z. Okay, so like this, it should feel much better on the gamepad and still work exactly the same on the keyboard. So let's test. So here I am moving around, and yep, now it is much easier to just stay around and look straight at a counter. Okay, so that's great. So I can pick up, and this is all much easier, and the character is no longer just sliding left and right nonstop. Okay, that's great. So now that this is working, let's add support for rebinding our controller bindings. So over here on the game input, let's do it just like we did for the keyboard. So let's add a bunch more bindings over here on the enum. Let's add the gamepad interact, then the gamepad interact alternate, and then the gamepad pause. Okay, so we have our bindings. Then let's go down and add them to both our functions. So first the text and then the bindings. So over here on the text, let's copy pretty much this. We're going to have the gamepad interact. Then we're going to have the other two. So the gamepad interact alternate and the gamepad pause. Okay. Now for these bindings, we're going to use the same actions. So this one is the interact alternate, and over here we have the interact. And over here on the input actions, we saw that we added for all of them. On index 0, we have the keyboard, and on the index 1, we have all of the gamepads. So over here, that's literally the only change. For the gamepad, let's go into bindings and access the array on index 1. Okay, and then over here on the rebind binding, it's going to be pretty much the exact same thing. So let's copy all of these, change this to the gamepad interact, then the gamepad interact alternate, and then the gamepad pause. So on all of these, all we need to change is just the binding index, put them all on 1. Okay, so with that, all of the code over here on the game input is working perfectly. Now let's go over here into our options UI. So we've got all of our buttons. So let's duplicate our buttons. Let's just go into the interact, the pause, and so on. Let's duplicate, push them to the right side, okay. And just change the name. So let's go into all of them. So this one's the gamepad interact button, then the gamepad interact alternate, and finally the gamepad pause, okay. Also inside, let's also rename these buttons just to make sure the text works great. And let's also make sure that these show up behind the press the rebind key. So let's drag them, put them above. Okay, so that's our setup over here on the options UI. Now let's go over here on the options UI script, and let's add references to our buttons and to our text objects. So let's copy all of these, the gamepad, and add all of these. This is the pause, the interact, and the interact alternate. And then down here, the exact same thing. Let's add all of these. Okay, like this. Now over here, let's drag all of our references. So on the options UI, let's make sure to always drag the correct things. So the gamepad interact text, the interact alternate text, and the pause button text, and then the buttons themselves. So the pause button, interact alt, and the interact button. Again, make sure you always drag the correct references. So check and double check, make sure everything is correct. Okay. Then over here for our code, let's first handle the text over here. So the text for all of these. So the gamepad interact text, then the gamepad interact alternate text, and finally the gamepad pause text. And we just go the gamepad pause, the gamepad interact alternate, and the gamepad interact. Finally, over here on the buttons, let's do the exact same thing. So gamepad interact, interact alternate, and the pause. Okay, so we added everything. Let's do a test and see if everything is working. So over here, let's pause the game, go into the options, and for the interact, let's modify this one. Instead of A, let's put it on B. And yep, there you go, it did go. So let's close, let's resume, and now let's see. So if I approach and I press A, nothing happens. Press B, and there you go, it does interact. Okay, awesome. So the rebinding is all working perfectly, except we have another obvious issue. I can pause with the gamepad. However, now with this paused, I cannot click on any of those buttons. And if I go back to the main menu, over here I also cannot do anything with the controller. So let's solve that. The first step is on the event system object. Look at how it shows us this warning. Basically, if we're using the new input system, we should be using a different input handler here. Thankfully, this is super easy. We just need to click on this button, and yep, that's it. It automatically sets it up. Now, the way that this works is by pre-selecting buttons. And in order to better see which button is selected, we should probably add a more visible color. Let's go into our pause window. So for now, let's hide over here the options UI, show the pause window, and we have these 3 buttons. Let's select all of them. And over here on the right side, on the button, we can see one option for the selected color. So instead of being white, which is going to be really difficult to see, let's put something really visible. So let's say like a bright green. Okay, like this. Let's do the same thing for all of the buttons on the options UI. So let's show this one and find all of the buttons. So we've got all of these ones down here and these 3 ones up here. And let's do the same thing. So on the selected, let's put it all on a nice screen. Okay, so all the buttons have a nice selected color. And just like this, if we test, and if I pause the game, and right now nothing is selected, so right now I cannot do anything with the controller. However, if I press over here with the mouse on this button and then let go whilst outside the button, yep, look at that, now that button is selected. So now as long as that one is selected, now if I move with the mousepad, yep, now I can navigate through this menu. And if I press on A, yep, I can essentially click that button. So that's great. Basically, all we need is to make sure that we select the button as soon as the pause menu shows up. So let's go over here on the game pause UI script. And then over here, let's go into the show function. So when we show this window, when we do, let's go into the resume button and just call the select function. This will make it selected. So that's it. And with this, if we test, and now here with the game playing, if I pause whilst pressing the button on the gamepad, and if there you go, that one is selected, and now I can select any option. Okay, that's great. So now it works fully with just the gamepad, except now if I go into options, yep, now you can see that the button that is selected is still the options one over there on the background. So let's also make sure to select the button on the options as soon as the options window shows up. So over here on the options UI, let's go into our show function and let's just select the sound effects button and just call select. Okay, let's test. So here, let's pause, go into options, select, and there you go, that did work. Okay, great. Except we have another issue. As I move up or down over here on these buttons, yep, look at that, some of them are a bit strange. Like for example, over here on A, I'm moving up, and look at that, it actually selected the resume button behind it. So as we are moving up or down, we are actually selecting buttons on both menus. That's very strange. Basically what is going on is that since both windows are visible, the game is trying to guess which button we want to select. Basically what is happening is Unity is trying to use automatic navigation. If we select a button, so let's go, for example, let's hide the options and show just the game pause. Okay, let's select one of these buttons. And over there on the button component, we can see navigation is set to automatic and we have a button to visualize. And if we click on that, yep, over here we can see all kinds of arrows. For example, we can see one over here on the options that seems to be going to some button in there. That is going to be the button that is showing over there. So if we move down from the options, we're going to end up over here on the interact alt button. Now usually the automatic navigation actually works very well. The only reason why we're having problems is because we have both windows active at once. One solution to this is to make the navigation explicit. So let's hide the options here and over here on the resume. On the navigation, instead of automatic, let's put none and then let's select explicit. And if now we have all four fields. So we can decide which object gets selected when we are here and we move up, down, left, or right. So for example, here we would drag for the up. Going up, we could go into the main menu, so we would drag that button. And going down, we could drag the options button. So that's one solution, just add the explicit navigation to every single button. Or another simpler solution is let's leave this one on automatic, and instead we're just going to hide the pause window once we are in the options window. So over here on the game pause UI, let's see over here we are showing the options UI, and when we do, let's just call hide on this. So we are going to hide this window when we show the options. And then on the options, we want to know when the options closes so that we can show this one again. So over here on the show function, let's receive an action. This is what we're going to do when we close the options. Let's call it on close button action. And let's store it up here. So let's store a simple private action for this. Okay, so we have this. And then down here when we have our show function, when we have, let's set this equals this, we store this. And then we're just going to run this action whenever we click on the close button. So let's go over here, the close button, we've got that one. Let's hide the options window and trigger this action. So now all we need is over here on the game pause UI, let's pass in, and basically when we close the options UI, we want to show the pause UI. Okay, so let's test. So here we are, let's pause the game. Okay, let's go into options and open it. And if there you go, it only shows the options. And over here, moving up or down works perfectly, and moving left and right also works perfectly. And now if I want to go back, let's go into close, press it, and there you go, back into the pause menu. All right, awesome. So everything is working perfectly. Now the last thing we need is over here on the main menu. So let's do the same thing. First, let's open up the main menu scene. Let's save the changes, okay? And over here, let's begin by doing the same thing on the event system. So let's replace it. Okay, great. Then let's go inside our canvas, inside the main menu UI. Let's select our buttons. And once again, let's modify the select color, put it on nice green. All right. And since over here, we only have one menu, we could set it as selected over here on the main menu UI script. That's one option. Or we can just go into the event system. And over here on the event system, there's a field for the first selected. So we can just drag the play button and that will automatically make it the selected one. So let's test. And yep, the play button starts off as selected and I can move up or down. And if I press a button, yep, there you go. Here I am playing the game. I can pause, I can resume, go back to the main menu and so on. All right, awesome. So here we added the final thing we needed to make our game fully playable with the gamepad. Thanks to how the input system works and the menu automatic navigation, this was a pretty simple task. With this, our game is pretty much completely done. However, the next lecture is also one of the most important lectures. It's all about polish, so let's do that in the next lecture.